right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Sam Gralty. I'm the events manager with the Vermont Land Trust, and welcome to Spring Wildflowers, Harbingers of Hope. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. If you're not familiar with Vermont Land Trust, we're a membership organization dedicated to protecting farmland, forest land, and community lands across the state. Since 1977, we have permanently protected over 640,000 acres, which equates to roughly 11% of the state. Before we get started, just a few brief Zoom reminders. We are recording this, but because it's a webinar, you won't appear in the recording. If you have questions for Liz, feel free to use the Q&A feature. You should see it at the bottom of your screen. You can enter your own questions there, and you can also give other folks questions a thumbs up, and we'll tend to favor questions that have a lot of interest. So if there's one that's really curious, you're curious about as well, feel free to give it a thumbs up. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. Can't guarantee we'll get to all of them, but we'll get to as many as we can. As I mentioned before, I have the chat open right now, but once I pass it over to Liz, I'll be closing that down. So you will be able to still chat with me. So if you have a tech issue, feel free to reach out for that. But the main way to submit questions is via that Q&A feature. So please go ahead and use that Q&A feature. And then lastly, if you want to have closed captions, you could definitely turn those on at the bottom of your screen. But yeah, without further ado, it's my pleasure to pass it off to ecologist Liz Thompson.
Well, thank you so much, Sam, and thanks everyone for being here. It's really great to see people coming out and welcoming spring. The subtitle of this talk is Harbingers of Hope, Spring Wildflowers, Harbingers of Hope. And I think we need hope right now. I think we need a lot of hope, and I sure do. And I'm beginning to see it in the natural world. So I'm really excited to just share some things I've seen and some things I've seen in years past, and some fun facts about spring wildflowers, things that we'll be able to see as the spring progresses. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about first just flower structure, how flowers are put together. So we are all sort of on the same page about that. Then we'll talk about hope in early flowers, just a few things that are actually out right now. The very first wildflowers of spring that are out right now. And then for some things that might be coming along a little later, we'll go by habitat. We'll look at dry oak maple limestone forests, limestone bluff cedar pine forests, rich northern hardwood forests, and some wetlands, and those will be the habitats we'll focus on. And then I'll show you just a few books. There's a million resources out there to help you, but I'll just show you a few of my favorites and talk about a few places to visit in Vermont. I know some of you are zooming in from elsewhere, and so hope you'll come to Vermont and visit our beautiful places. The themes we'll touch on here will be habitats, where plants grow, which plants grow where and why, timing, the timing of different flower appearance, wildflower appearance, a little bit about life history strategies, pollination, dispersal, for example, and then diversity, the diversity of species that we'll see, and if it comes up a little bit about some of the uses of some of these plants to humans and also to insects and other animals. So here's just a stock image from the internet that I grabbed, and this is just to show you, what the typical flower structure is like. So this is a very generic flower with sepals on the outside, the green bodies that are on the outside of the flower, petals usually colored but not always. Interior to that we have stamens, which are composed of anthers, which is where the pollen is born, and filaments, which are just long stalks that elevate the anthers out into the air. And then interior to that is the pistil, which is made up of a stigma. Think of sticky, that's where the pollen lands, a style, a long thing where the pollen grain actually grows down into the ovary, which is where the seeds are kept. And so there's 8 seeds inside this ovary. At this stage, they're called ovules, but when they mature, they will be called seeds. So this is your typical flower structure. And just because we're going to be looking at this, looking at flowers as we go along, and I'll use some of this terminology. So, but what I want to do first is to talk about what I have been seeing, just a few things that I have been seeing. And I know you've been seeing things too. Willows, okay? This was in my neighborhood in just around the corner a couple of days ago. The willows are beginning to flower. They're beginning to show their flowers. So pussy willows are in fact flower clusters, and the willows are beginning to show their flowers now. So this was in just really honestly just a wet ditch around the corner from where I live. Now here's something that I saw the other day in southern Maine. This was actually growing in someone's yard. This is not a native plant in our region, but it is native to our south. This is vernal witch hazel. And I'm showing you this because when we go out in the woods at this time of year, I see a lot of people noticing through the winter, noticing this, which is our own witch hazel that does grow in the wild here in the Northeast. And but these are not the flowers. These are the remains of last year's flowers. And again, the remains of last year's flowers on witch hazel. So you might look at this and think this is a flower, but it's actually a kind of defunct flower. But this, I love this, the vernal witch hazel, which is grows in the south. Another thing I saw just this afternoon, driving up Route 2A in Williston, was this. Okay, you can see, this is on a very busy road. This beautiful silver maple, which is flowering now, and I was so excited to see it. And you can see that this is just in the front of somebody's yard. They cut one of them down actually, but I was so glad they didn't cut this one down. It's a gorgeous tree. And getting close up to it, this is what I saw. These flowers, this is today, this afternoon, and these are the male flowers of silver maple. A silver maple has separate male and female trees usually. And so this is a male tree with the male flowers and the stamens hanging out. When you look closely at a female silver maple, this is, I want to acknowledge and thank my friend Brian Pfeiffer, who took this photo and allowed me to use it. But this is a female flower with the stigmas sticking out of these flower buds. However, you can actually see stamens in there too. Whether those stamens will actually be functional, I don't know. But the fact is, they say that maples are unisexual, that they only have male or female flowers on a single plant, but often you see them mixed up, that there are male and female parts in the same inflorescence or the same group of flowers on maples. So they don't necessarily read the rule book. Another thing we're seeing at this time of year is red maple beginning to show its flowers and its leaves. And you know what I want to do? I want to actually read to you a poem. I'm going to read a couple poems tonight, and one of them is by a poet named Sean Prentice, and I'd really like to recommend that you look him up, Sean Prentice, and this is his poem, Rising Red. After the blankets of white snow have melted into surging brooks, but before leaf out, those fluttering flags of chlorophyll leaves swallowing the sun, our mountain grows into April's rising red, new leaves budding into almost blossom, anthocyanins pulsating within, later to illuminate dying autumn. Today, this awoken maple red offers the color of sweetness, oncoming, shattering days of green. Sean Prentice. Okay, so red maple, we look more closely at red maple, and there are some male flowers on red maple. And very quickly, those male flowers will fall to the ground. and you'll see them lying all over the place, lying all over the ground, because they shed their pollen and then they're done, and then they just fall to the ground. And then a little bit later, or at the same time, you'll see female flowers beginning to develop, but they develop a little bit later. The pollen is floating in the air and lands on these stigmas on the red maple flower. And here are the red maple fruits beginning to form. And there they are a little bit later. Again, thanks to Brian Pfeiffer for these gorgeous photos. So the maples are out now. Other tree species so there's willows out now, maples are out now, alders are out now, and some other things. Also, elms are flowering now. So a lot of trees are flowering this early, but on the forest floor, in wet places, check this out. This is flowering right now. Do you know what this is? Yeah, sure you do. It's skunk cabbage. This is skunk cabbage. This is the early stage of skunk cabbage. You might think of skunk cabbage as this thing with big green leaves, but this is the flower of skunk cabbage. And it's a fascinating thing because this structure that you see here, it's called a spathe. And this thing has the ability to generate heat. And it can actually melt the snow around it. It can be inside of this thing, it can be 20 degrees warmer than the outside temperature. Inside of this thing is this little ball of flowers. And if you look at this closely, you'll see that there are stamens here. And inside, in between all these stamens, there's actually a pistil in there. So these are perfect flowers, meaning they have both male and female parts. And there you can look more closely and see the stamens surrounding the pistil, which you cannot see in this photo, but you can see the pollen grains being scattered around. So as I said, another thing that is flowering soon is speckled alder. Now, speckled alder doesn't look quite like this yet, but it's beginning to show its flowering phase. Another thing that is flowering very soon, and this photo was taken last year at this time, but these are coming in a little bit later this year. This is kind of a late year, actually, is beaked hazelnut. And here is, it's in the same family as the alder. So you see it has a similar structure with separate male and female flowers. There's the male catkin and the female flowers here. And then here is a beautiful photo, again from Brian Pfeiffer, of the female flowers with the stigmas sticking out, catching the pollen. Another thing we're going to see on the forest floor pretty soon will be, not on the forest floor, but on roadsides mostly, I think, is coltsfoot. And this is not a native plant, but it's so gorgeous and just so cheerful that I love seeing it. Not all plants that are not native are invasive. This is not an invasive plant, particularly mildly so, but it's a beautiful plant that I love to see. So those are some really, really early things that we can enjoy. And then as time goes on, I'm going to start talking about some things that we'll be seeing in April and May. So this is March. It's just after the middle of March, and it's early now. But starting in late March, but more into early April and into May, we'll start seeing some other things. And we'll start with the dry oak maple limestone forest. I want to acknowledge for this illustration the artist Libby Davidson, who illustrated the book Wetland, Woodland, Wildland, A Guide to the Natural Communities of Vermont. She did a lovely job illustrating this book, and this is one of her illustrations. It was just so fun to sit with her. I actually sat with her in the woods while she sketched this and then finalized the drawing. And we sat literally right here to do this. So you can see the dry oak maple limestone forest is a forest that has shallow to bedrock soils. You can see the bedrock showing there. And there's oak on the left, that big tree on the left is oak, but there's also sugar maple. They tend to be enriched sites with a lot of calcium in the soil. And this is in Niquette Bay State Park in Colchester. In this forest, early on in the spring, you're going to see bloodroot. It's one of the first things that you're going to see emerging. One of my favorite early spring wildflowers. And look how the leaf just surrounds the flower. And even earlier, the flower, you don't even see the flower. The flower's down in and surrounded by the leaves in this beautiful way. So the leaves protect the flower as it's emerging, because this comes up really early, really quite early, when it can still be pretty cold. And then as time goes on, the flower emerges and begins to show its petals and the interior of the flower. And there it is again, emerging. You can see the veininess of the leaves. And look at this flower. When you look down on this flower, this is gorgeous. Now, I want to just talk about something interesting about this flower and about insects and what insects see and what insects expect. Most of the time, when you see a flower like this that has a brightly colored center, this is an invitation to an insect that there is nectar in that flower. And the funny thing about bloodroot is that there actually isn't a nectar reward for the insect in there. So they will go in, an insect will go in to get nectar, and in the process will gather pollen on its wings and carry that pollen to another flower and fertilize another flower. But it's a little bit of a trickster thing here in the bloodroot. Nevertheless, the flowers do get pollinated and fruits do develop, and this is what the fruits look like a little bit later. And look what's inside of these fruits. This is really cool. This is the inside of a bloodroot fruit. And the seeds are covered with these funny structures called eliosomes, which are high in fat and very, very attractive to ants in particular. So ants will take those seeds and move them into their own burrows to feed their young. Thereby moving the seeds around and planting seeds in another place. Why is it called bloodroot? Because the plant exudes a red-colored milky sap. So this is on the leaf, but the root itself is also exudes this sap. It's in the poppy family, and members of the poppy family have this characteristic of having milky and colored sap. Another really early thing is hepatica, one of my favorites, and I bet one of your favorite flowers. This photo was also taken in the same park, Niquette Bay State Park in Colchester. I just love hepatica. This is blunt-lobed hepatica. There's two species of hepatica in the Northeast, and they are, the genus name is anemone. It used to be called Hepatica americana, and now it is called anemone americana, because it is very closely related to the things we know of as anemones. There's another photo of it, and look at those hairy stems. And there's a close-up look, and when you look at the close-up of this flower, you can see that there's many stamens in the center. Unlike the typical flower that I showed you at the beginning, this has many pistils in the inside and many stamens on the outside, an indeterminate number, lots of them, and also an indeterminate number of petals and sepals. This is a characteristic of the buttercup family. This is a member of the buttercup family, and this is one of the characteristics. Here's another image of this same flower by my friend John Tagliaferra, a wonderful professional photographer, that you can see. So the interesting thing about hepatica, and I often get questions about this, is the color. There's a color variation. There's a color range. They can range all the way from white like this to light pink like this to dark, sort of a light blue like this to a very deep blue like this. And they can also be pink. So this one has a little bit of pink to it, pink, white, pink to blue. And this, the color variation is understood to be a genetic variation. It is not, it is not environmental. In some plants, color differences are environmental. They do respond to changes in soil chemistry. Things like hydrangeas, for example, the colors of hydrangeas are related to soil chemistry. But in this case, it's strictly a genetic thing, like the color of your eyes or the color of your hair. There is another species of hepatica, the sharp-lobed hepatica, and there you can see the sharper lobes of the leaves of sharp-lobed hepatica. My next photo is to show you, if you look, here's the hepatica in the background, but if you look in the foreground, you see something equally interesting. And some people might not notice this one as much as they notice the hepatica in the background. But these are flowers too, even though they don't have showy petals. This is a plant called pedunculate sedge, which is a common sedge in these kinds of woods. And peduncle means a long stalk, a long flower stalk. So you can see these long flower stalks that are drooping over, and that's why it's called pedunculate sedge. Sedges have separate male and female flowers. This is this pedunculate sedge in fruit. And here is the male flower. These are the male flowers here. Oops, I'm sorry. These are the female flowers here with the stigmas. And these are the male flowers here with the stamens. So down below, the male flowers are at the top of the plant. The female flowers are down below. So you can see there's female flowers here and male flowers here. But the timing of their flowering is a little bit different, so that to promote cross-pollination. Another thing really early in these woods is wild ginger, which has these amazing dark red flowers that sit right on the forest floor. And why are they dark red, and why do they sit on the forest floor? Well, it is carrion beetles that pollinate them. So they look and they look like rotting meat, and that's what insects are attracted to. Another thing early on is Dutchman's breeches. A favorite flower. This is something that is a plant that is a true spring ephemeral, meaning that when it flowers and fruits in early spring, and it is completely invisible after spring. Throughout the summer and through the fall and through the winter, the plant is there. There are underground parts, but there's the stems and flowers and leaves are just withered away, and you don't see them at all. Again, this plant has eliosomes. The seeds have eliosomes, and so they are again distributed and dispersed by ants. And look at this. This is a photo of an ant pushing this pushing this big seed with this eliosome. Another one related to this is squirrel corn. Squirrel corn is another plant in the genus Dicentra. Bleeding hearts are in the genus Dicentra. And it's called squirrel corn because it has these underground parts that look like grains of corn. And they are in fact edible and eaten by animals. Let's see, what else are we going to find early in the woods? We're going to find this shrub called leatherwood or wickapea. It's called leatherwood because the stems are very flexible. They don't actually, if you try to break a stem, it doesn't break, it just bends. Really interesting plants. And again, you can see, so there's usually 3 flowers together here. And there are the stamens, and here are the pistils, the stigmas, the pistils sticking out. Okay, here's one of our favorites. White trillium. And this is going to flower a little bit later. So this is later than the Dutchman's breeches, later than the squirrel corn, later than the bloodroot, later than the wickapea. White trillium. This is in May. This will be flowering in May. And here it is with a beetle pollinating it. And there's the beetle going way down in, pollinating this flower. Most of these flowers are pollinated by a variety of insects. Most of them do not have specific insects that pollinate them, although some of them do, but most of them are kind of generalists when it comes to pollinators. This one is also a white trillium. White trilliums turn pink in age. And sometimes it can be confusing. People might look at this and say, oh, that's a pink trillium. That's a different species. No, it's a white trillium that simply is just turned pink in age. There are 3 common species of trillium in Vermont and 1 rare species. But the common one, this is one of the common ones, but this one only grows west of the Green Mountains in Vermont. It grows out into the Midwest, but it doesn't grow east of the Green Mountains in Vermont and New England. Not naturally anyway. You can plant it. People do. Another thing that's common in these kinds of woods is early meadow rue. And this is a wonder. I love the way this unfolds like a ball of a deck of cards kind of. And there it is unfolding, the leaves unfolding. And this has, an early meadow rue has separate male and female plants and separate male and female flowers. So this is a male plant. There you see the stamens hanging down. And here's a female plant. Same species, looks very different, but this is the female, these are the female flowers. Oh, another favorite is Herb Robert, Geranium robertianum. And then yellow lady slipper. This is a rare species, but one that you will find in these dry oak maple limestone forests if you look hard enough. Okay, the next habitat we're going to look at is limestone bluff cedar pine forests, which is a rare natural community that occurs on the shores of Lake Champlain and also around the Great Lakes and the Niagara Escarpment. But an uncommon community. It's really only on the edge of the lake. And another sedge that occurs there that's one of my favorites is ebony sedge, and there's a close-up of it. And then another favorite is wild columbine. It grows in these rocky places. These are hummingbird pollinated. So the pollen, the nectar rather, the nectar reward is up here in this long spur, and the hummingbird needs to reach up into that long spur to get the nectar and thereby pollinates the plant. Early saxifrage is another one that you'll see in this kind of habitat, and there it is when it's flowering. You can see the lake in the background and a closer look. Related to the saxifrage is bishop's cap or Mitella diphylla, and there's the flower, a closer look at the flower of Mitella diphylla. It's the most amazing little flower. It looks like a snowflake, and just a gorgeous, delicate thing. And why it's called bishop's cap, this on the photo on the left is not a great photo, but that is actually the fruit. And so the fruit, if you look at the fruit and tip it upside down sort of, and use your imagination a little bit, it is to someone, it looks like a bishop's cap. And this is a picture on the right. These are 2 bishops, the outgoing bishop of Vermont and the incoming bishop. She came in as bishop a few years ago, but they're both wearing their bishop's caps, and so is this person over here. Okay, rich northern hardwood forests are among my favorite habitats, places where there's a lot of calcium in the soil and just a lot of species diversity, and just the forest floor in a rich northern hardwood forest can be just lush green with spring wildflowers. Another sedge that I love is plantain-leaved sedge, and it's called that because look at these leaves. They look just like the leaves of plantain. And plantain-leaved sedge, again, there are the female flowers down below, male flowers up above, flowering at a different time. And there's the male flowers. Oh, why this says a close-up of a bug. You know, when you put together a PowerPoint presentation, if you've ever done this, it automatically generates captions. And the caption that was generated from this, for this one, is a close-up of a bug. It's not a close-up of a bug, but that's what PowerPoint thought. Other things in this habitat, roundleaf violet. Oh, an early blue cohosh. Oops, early blue cohosh, one of my favorites. That is just the most amazing thing. This is blue cohosh popping up from the ground, and this does emerge pretty early, but flowers a little bit later. And there's the amazing flower of blue cohosh that is just all deep dark purple. And another close look at it. The what's actually going on here is, structurally speaking, these dark purple things are actually sepals, not petals. And the petals, these things here, these little U-shaped things or C-shaped things, are modified petals that are modified into nectar glands. And so it's just a little bit of an odd setup. These are pollinated by a variety of things, as insects as well. And here's a, look at this. This is out of focus, but you can see this insect, this wasp, approaching the flower, and there it has landed, and it is looking for a nectar reward. Another one of my favorite plants in this habitat is large flowered bellwort, Uvularia grandiflora. And there it is hanging down in the sun. So those are some plants of the rich northern hardwood forest, some of my favorites. Now we're going to switch over to northern hardwood forest, which is the most common natural community in Vermont and in the Northeast. This is a northern hardwood forest, also known to many as the beech, birch, maple forest. So in this illustration, again by Libby Davidson, we have American beech, which is, in this case, has had bear climbing it. Birch, which is yellow birch. That's a long-lived birch, unlike the white birch and gray birch. And then sugar maple here. And then in the understory, you can see, look at this, is viburnum or hobblebush. So in the northern hardwood forest, some of the things we'll see there include spring beauty. Let's take a closer look at spring beauty. Now, is that not a nectar guide? I mean, this is really cool. This is like a landing platform for insects. It's not only do those stripes on the petals invite the insects in, but the yellow color in the center shows a different color. So there's a differentiation. So there's sort of two different ways that the insect is brought into the center of the flower to get hopefully a nectar reward, and hopefully for the flower to gather up pollen on its body and move it on to another flower to pollinate. Mayflower, Epigea repens, is another one that grows in northern hardwood forests. Also in kind of piney woods. This one grows in some more sterile soils that are not as enriched, not as moist, maybe sometimes a little bit dry. And I want to acknowledge and thank my friend Claire Dacey for sharing this photo with us. And then another bellwort. Now so I showed you the large flowered bellwort just a few seconds ago, and this is another species in the same genus. This is sessile-leaved bellwort in the same genus, but its habitat is different. This one grows in ordinary, not so fertile northern hardwood forests, whereas the large flowered bellwort seems to really need, I don't know if it needs, but it seems to always grow in very enriched places. So this one is called sessile-leaved bellwort. The color of the flower is more of a pale cream colored, a lovely thing. It's also known as wild oats. And now here's another one that grows in those common northern hardwood forests, trout lily or dogtooth violet, Erythronium americanum. Again, thank you, Brian Pfeiffer, for this gorgeous photo. And these, this is a fun thing about lilies. This is lilies, remember I talked about how petals are usually colored and sepals are usually green. Well, in the lilies, there's three things on the outside, three structures on the outside of the flower. And you see these other three structures are interior to those outer three structures. A little hard to see in this photo. But the point is that these are technically sepals and these are technically petals. But botanists, loving to make up words as they do, had to come up with a different term for these, and they call them all tepals. It's like petals misspelled. So they're all called tepals, and there's 6 of them in the lilies. And trout lily, so why is it called trout lily? Well, the leaves are speckled like trout. And in addition, I'm just going to skip to this slide here. In addition, they tend to occur in schools in very large numbers together. And but here's look at this. There's an insect hanging out over here, and here's a bumblebee approaching this trout lily in my backwoods. So again, they're pollinated by bees, flies, a variety of insects. But one thing that's really cool about trout lilies is that after these are spring ephemerals, so that the leaves actually fade away over time, over the season. And after that happens, you'll see these funny things on the forest floor in the spring, these little worm-like things. And thanks to Chris Rimmer for this photo. These are what are called droppers. And so from the base of one trout lily leaf, it'll send out this vegetative reproductive structure called dropper with a new plant on the end of the dropper. Now, these little things right here are not part of the trout lily. Those are seedlings of something else. So you can't actually see the new plant, but that's why you get these just fields of trout lily leaves with maybe no flowers, because these are all vegetatively reproduced from those droppers, and get this, they're not old enough yet to be bearing flowers and fruits. It takes about 6 or 7 years for a trout lily to get enough energy reserves in its roots to be able to bear flowers and fruits. So you'll see a lot of leaves without flowers and fruits. And with this photo, I'm going to read you another poem. This is a poem by Mary Catherine Creel, M.K. Creel, she goes by. She says, it's Trout Lilies, a poem of perseverance. And she talks about some changes that are maybe, I'll just read the poem. I don't know if there are trout in this stream, where one fork converges with another to form a river, or just the fins of fleshy, speckled leaves on a tangled slope beneath 2 oaks. The dogs we walked along brown sugar banks are gone, and the trout lilies have been displaced, uprooted by erosion and years of floodwater. But here, a single slender bud, soon to become a swan. That's Mary Catherine Creel. Well, some other plants that you might see in the northern hardwood forest include red trillium. There it is in bud. So the second of the common trilliums, also known as stinking Benjamin or nosebleed. And this is a dark red flower that does in fact smell kind of bad because it is pollinated by carrion flies. And so it looks and smells like rotting flesh. The third common trillium in our forests is painted trillium, Trillium undulatum. And this grows more commonly at slightly higher elevations than the other 2. Other things that you'll find in the northern hardwood forest, Canada mayflower. And you can get a sense of how the size of this plant by what's behind it. These are actually mosses. That's haircat moss behind it. And then something that looks a lot like it is foam flower. Also grows just in our common northern hardwood forests. Other things, fringed polygula or gay wings. There's a closer look at that. Some violets, long spurred violet. There's many, many species of violet in the Northeast, but this long spurred violet is an easy one to identify with its long spur. And again, the nectar is way at the end of that. Downy yellow violet, Viola pubescens. Toothwort, Cardamone. And then in the tree, in the shrub and tree canopy, this is a shadbush. And closer look at, there's several species of shadbush or juneberry or serviceberry, and they flower on forest edges in the forest, in northern hardwood forests. Another shrub, we already saw an image of this hobblebush, and there's a closer look at its flowers. And this is really interesting because the group of flowers here, the interior flowers, you see how they have stuff, they have stamens and pistils, and the outer flowers are sterile. They don't have any functionality in terms of producing seeds. So they are there, those big white flowers are there to attract the insects to the flower cluster, but the work goes on here in the center. Then let's look at this as another photo from Brian Pfeiffer. This is just a photo of the forest greening up in the spring. If you take a closer look at that, when you look at this forest, and all the different colors in this forest in the early spring, you're not seeing leaves actually. These are red maples, so you're seeing red maple flowers, and these sugar maples that are this really, really light yellow, those are flowers. So the sugar maple flowers a little bit later than the red maple, but there are the sugar maple flowers. And again, male and female are separate. These are female flowers here and a male flower here. And there they are again. And this is a wonderful image from the Northern Forest Atlas by Jerry Jenkins of maturing sugar maple flowers, which are turning into seeds. Well, finally, I'm going to show you just a few photos talk about a few plants that grow in wetlands and that flower early in the spring. Marsh marigold is one of my favorites. And there it is, look, a closer look. This is in the buttercup family again, and you can see all the many, many stamens and pistils in the center of the flower. Another yellow one that grows in wet meadows is golden alexanders or Zizia aurea. This looks superficially a lot like wild parsnip, which is an invasive weed that causes a skin rash, but this one is very short. It's only a few inches tall, whereas the wild parsnip is quite a bit taller and flowers later in the season. So there's the golden alexanders. And then just finally, we're going to go, maybe not finally, almost finally, we're going to go back to the willows and talk a little bit about willows. So again, here is a willow branch. These are in groups of flowers on the willow branch. And willows, like many tree species and shrub species, have separate male and female flowers on separate plants. And this is called wand willow. This species is called wand willow, Cerex eriocephala. There are lots of willows in our flora, lots of willows in the Northeast and in Vermont. And I have a relative who was an aspiring botanist at one time. She's my age. She's my sister, actually. She was an aspiring botanist at one time, and she said when she found out how many different willows there were, and she just got overwhelmed and decided not to be a botanist because they are just really, really hard to learn, but not impossible. but you need to look at them at all seasons. Anyway, this one's wand willow, and these are male flowers. You can see these stamens all gathered together in this catkin or group of flowers. And the date on that was, this was a couple years ago, April 23rd. Then here is the same in the same group of plants, the same day, April 23rd. These are the female flowers. And then a little bit later on May 3rd, here are these same plants, the male flowers, having really, okay, here's April 23rd. And then a couple weeks later, there they are, really having kind of spread out and dispersed their pollen. And there on May 3rd are the female flowers. Again, I'll show you the comparison. There they are younger. There they are a couple weeks later, having puffed out, and the seeds, the fruits have been, are beginning to develop seeds inside. Okay, finally, finally, this is Rhodora, Rhododendron canadense, which is a beautiful plant that grows in bogs. And if you want to see this plant growing in the wild in Vermont, you can go to Colchester Bog, which is an easy bog to get to. There's a boardwalk, and you can visit and see this flower. And Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote about Rhodora. He said, "In May, when sea winds pierced our solitudes, I found the fresh rhodora in the woods, spreading its leafless blooms in a damp nook, to please the desert and the sluggish brook. The purple petals fallen in the pool made the black water with their beauty gay. Here might the redbird come his plumes to cool, and court the flower that cheapens his array. Rhodora, if the sages ask thee why this charm is wasted on the earth and sky, tell them, dear, that if eyes were made for seeing, then beauty is its own excuse for being." Ralph Waldo Emerson. That's the final flower of our show. And now I just want to show you a few resources. Newcomb's Wildflower Guide. This is an old edition of Newcomb's Wildflower Guide. Still my favorite. This was published in the 1970s. Still my favorite wildflower book. It is fabulous. Wildflowers of New England is accompanied by this website, Go Botany. This is out of the Native Plant Trust, a really great resource for wildflowers of New England. And then The New Flora of Vermont by Arthur Gilman is a more technical manual of wildflowers of all plants that grow wild in Vermont. And then Wetland, Woodland, Wildland is the book that I wrote with Eric Sorensen and Bob Zano, that has lots of habitat information and tells you where you can go to look for some of these things. Then this book, this is a more Spring Wildflowers of the Northeast and Natural History, really, really nice book. And then this Walden Warming by Richard Premack is a really, really interesting take on what's happening with climate change and spring wildflowers and other things. Vermont Atlas of Life, which is really an important resource for sharing observations and finding out about what's growing in Vermont and what's flying, what's all kinds of biota. And then I want to point out Vermont Land Trust's land map, where you can go and find out about places to visit. And you can click on a place and find out more about it, like Equinox Preservation Trust in Manchester. It's a great place to visit. So a summary of some places you can visit on that VLT map. There's several sites here, 8 sites on the VLT map that I've pointed out that have great spring wildflowers, and then others that are not Vermont Land Trust conserved properties. Well, some of them are partially VLT conserved, but the Watershed Center in Bristol, Niquette Bay State Park in Colchester is an absolute favorite. And a couple of other sites here that I've mentioned, Colchester Bog. And with that, we will open it up to questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was lovely. I think one question that actually speaks to a little bit of what you were talking about with Walden warming. Can you talk a little bit more about how climate change has impacted the timing of flowering throughout the year?
Yeah, yeah. Generally speaking, and this is where if you use that Vermont Atlas of Life website, and there's information on flowering. You can actually track flowering times as they've changed through the years. But yes, many flowers, many plants are flowering earlier in the year. And what is what's the problem with that? The problem with that actually is that the synchronicity of the insects that if there are specialty pollinators, that if the emergence of insects and the emergence of the flowers is not synchronized, that can become a problem for the insects and for the plants. And that is what has been documented, that some of that timing is problematic for some species.
Can you talk a little bit too? I've seen it personally with lilacs, and somebody in the questions was talking about seeing some spring flowers in late November, like Herb Roberts at Suckerbrook and Williston, and what iNaturalist identified as forget-me-nots. So I think hearing things blooming not even early or late, but just seemingly fully out of the normal season. Can you talk a bit more about why and how that's happening?
Yeah, yeah. That is something that I've observed as well. And it's simply that plants respond for flowering. Plants respond to a couple different things. I mean, they do respond to day length, and they respond to temperature. So if the temperature increases to an adequate level for flowers, and not all plants respond to temperature, but some of them do, and they will flower at odd times. This happens now with Herb Robert. I've actually seen that I'm not sure that is a climate change effect, because that is a plant that I've seen flower at almost any time of year for a very long time. I've observed that. So, and the climate has been changing for a long time, but that does flower both in the spring and in the fall, and that may have to do with both temperature and day length. For some plants that are cultivated plants, we have, I've seen forsythia, for example. You've probably seen that too, flowering in the winter, just plain flowering in the winter. And so what happens when a plant does all that, emerges in the winter, when it's warm, puts all this energy into producing flowers, probably doesn't get to produce fruits because the insects aren't around. It depletes the energy of the plant. So it is spending resources doing this. It's responding automatically, but depleting resources, so that later, when it's supposed to flower, or when it might have flowered in another sort of more so-called normal year, it's left without the underground energy reserves to produce flowers, to produce as many flowers. So that's why that can be a problem.
Gotcha. We had one come in via the chat asking about what is there a lifespan of Jack in the Pulpit? They said that they've had some in the past and they seem to be gone.
Of Jack in the
Do you do
Pulpit,
anything about
yeah.
that?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
live, most of the plants that I have described are long-lived perennials, and Jack in the Pulpit can live for several years, and they have a lifespan, and so they will, complete their lifespan and die out in a place. The interesting thing about Jack in the Pulpit, I didn't show pictures of it, but is that, like many of these things, and like I talked about with the trout lily, it takes a long time for the plant to photosynthesize year after year after year, and through photosynthesis, put food into its underground parts, its roots, its underground stems or corms or whatever underground parts there are, and that energy is then used to produce flowers and fruits. So with Jack in the Pulpit, the first thing that Jack in the Pulpit is able to do, a young Jack in the Pulpit plant will not be able to produce flowers or fruits at all. It doesn't have enough energy. But as it matures, the Jack in the Pulpit begins to produce male flowers. And then as it matures even more and has more energy reserves in its roots, it can produce female flowers. And the point is that it takes more energy to produce female flowers and fruits, simply because, when you think about a fruit, think of a typical fruit like an apple or an orange or tomato or something like that. There's a lot of sugar in that, and sometimes even fat. So it takes a lot of energy to produce flowers and fruits that are female flowers and then fruits. So they do the male flowers first, and as they age, then they begin to produce female flowers. And as they age out, then eventually they simply, their life ends after a number of years. So they can, but they're also, Jack in the Pulpits are also, and I didn't mention this, but they're also one of the plants that wildlife will eat, deer will eat, and can deplete a population that way.
Gotcha. Maybe time for one more question, and honestly, this is a question for me. You have obviously a lot of great photos from other folks, but you're taking a lot of great photos yourself too. Do you have any tips for people photographing flowers and getting some good close-ups or other ways to make sure you can really document the things that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, and some of my photos are good and some of them are less good. You can see there's some variability in the quality there, and but persistence, I think, is the main thing, and not minding getting down on the ground. That's the thing, I just like when I see a flower, I just flop to the ground and start shooting photos. I do have a digital single lens reflex camera, a big, what I call my fat camera. So I have a sort of fancy camera. But the phone, the phones now can take fabulous photos. So it's really just patience and practice, I think, and not minding getting down on the ground. The only problem with getting down on the ground is I collect ticks, so I really have to check myself like for ticks at the end of every time I go out in the woods because, but I just do that. I just do that routinely anyway. But yeah, just persistence. And, I mean, one of the things that I just want to maybe say in closing is that this is absolutely so important to me. As things seem hard and hopeless and in many ways with climate change and just other things kind of falling apart around us, just flopping down on the ground and taking in a beautiful wildflower is something that just feeds my soul. And taking photos is actually part of that process.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, yeah, we are at time. So thank you, Liz, and thank you everybody for joining us. Yeah, I would encourage folks, if you're able to consider supporting VLT through making a donation. And we do have some upcoming events as well. You can find those at vlt.org/events. We got a bird walk down in Brattleboro and a great another bird focused event up in Belvedere. So feel free to please check those out. And I apologize to folks who have submitted some questions and we weren't able to get to them. We'll be sending out an email in the coming days with some follow-up resources as well as a link to the recording once we have that processed. So be on the lookout for that. And yeah, I think that's about it. So thank you all so much and have a wonderful night.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Sam.